The strangest part was not that Devereaux came back wrong. The strangest part was that he came back exactly right. And that was the problem nobody could explain. Mireille Okafor had worked the backcountry of the Shoshone National Forest for 11 years before she filed the report that ended her career. She was 43, methodical, with a reputation among the Cody, Wyoming field station for writing the most meticulous incident documentation in the district's history. She had survived 2 winters alone at the Washakie Trailhead cabin. She had pulled a drowning man from a tributary of the South Fork of the Shoshone River with her bare hands in October of 2019. She was not, in the words of her supervisor at the time, Gareth Polnow, a woman given to imaginative episodes. That was the phrase he used at the inquiry. Imaginative episodes. He said it the way someone says a thing they have been advised to say. The relevant events began on September 4th, 2022, a Sunday, the last weekend before the Labor Day crowds thinned and the forest returned to something approximating silence. The Beartooth Highway had been partially closed since Wednesday due to a rock slide near the switchbacks above Clay Butte, which meant foot traffic had redistributed southward into the Shoshone backcountry in a way that was atypical for that time of year. Mireille had noted this in her log. She noted everything. She had been noting everything for 11 years, which is why, when the anomalies began, she recognized them not as supernatural occurrences, but as data points that refused to cohere. The first concerned Devereaux Sane, a 41-year-old high school geography teacher from Billings, who had been hiking the Elk Fork drainage loop alone since September 1st. She had checked him in herself at the trailhead kiosk, had seen his permit, had briefly examined his gear, and found it adequate for the conditions. He had a Garmin InReach clipped to his sternum strap. He had a bear canister properly fastened to his pack's lower frame. He had 5 days of food and a reasonable itinerary. She had spoken to him for perhaps 4 minutes. He was specific about his route and vague about his reasons for choosing it, which she found unremarkable. He was due back at the Elk Fork trailhead on the afternoon of September 5th. He arrived at 3:17 p.m., 14 minutes ahead of his projected return window. Mireille was conducting a routine check of the kiosk hardware when she saw him emerge from the tree line at the point where the trail bends around the eastern side of the meadow, near the cluster of lodgepole pines that had partially blown down in the windstorm of August 8th. She noted the time because it was her habit to note the time. She called out his name. He turned. He recognized her. He smiled and raised one hand in a brief acknowledging wave, the same casual gesture many returning hikers made. He completed the crossing of the meadow, reached the kiosk area, and began the standard checkout process. She asked if the hike had gone well. He said it had been beautiful. She asked whether he had seen any bear sign along the upper drainage. He said he had seen old scat near the second crossing, nothing fresh, probably a week out or more. She asked whether he had needed to use the Garmin. He said no. She asked him to sign the log. He signed it. His handwriting was consistent with the signature on his permit. She did not realize anything was wrong until he had already driven away. It was the scat. She had hiked the upper Elk Fork drainage herself on August 29th, 6 days before Devereaux's trip began, as part of a routine trail assessment following the windstorm. At the second crossing, she had found no scat at all, old, new, or otherwise. She had logged this absence specifically because the previous assessment in July had shown heavy grizzly activity in that section. It was possible, of course, that a bear had deposited scat there in the days after her survey, and that by the time Devereaux passed through, it was old enough to read as a week out or more. The explanation was available. She filed it away and went about the rest of her afternoon. The second anomaly arrived, not as an event, but as a sound, which made it harder to file away. On the morning of September 9th, Mireille was conducting a solo assessment of the Frontier Creek drainage, approximately 6.8 miles from the nearest trailhead, at an elevation of around 8,200 feet. It was a cold morning, 38 degrees at 7 a.m., with a light wind from the northwest that dropped to nothing by 9:30, at which point the forest became unusually still. Not the clean stillness of a windless day. A stillness like a room where the ventilation has been switched off. She could not hear insects. She could not hear the creek, which at that elevation in early September should have been audible from at least 40 yards. She was standing approximately 22 yards from the bank when she noticed she could not hear it. She walked to the bank. The water was moving normally. She could see it moving. She stood at the edge and listened, and after perhaps 8 seconds, the sound of the water resumed, as if something that had been absorbing it had moved away. She wrote, "Acoustic anomaly, possible hearing disruption, check for altitude symptoms," in her log. She continued the assessment. She was approximately 2 miles further into the drainage, near the unnamed tributary locals sometimes called the Blind Fork, when she heard the footsteps. She heard them before she processed what she was hearing, which is to say that her body cataloged them as footsteps, before her mind had confirmed the category. A rhythm of compression on soft ground, duff and needle litter, and the occasional patch of late-season mud, moving parallel to her course at a distance she estimated, by sound intensity, at somewhere between 40 and 70 feet. The terrain between her and the source was densely wooded, mostly Engelmann spruce, with very little undergrowth at that elevation, which meant she should have been able to see whatever was making the sound if it was large enough to make it. She stopped walking. The footsteps continued for 2 full steps after she stopped. Then they stopped. She waited. She counted to 60. Nothing. She took 3 steps forward. After a delay of approximately half a second, she heard 3 steps from the same bearing, at the same rhythm, but not synchronized with hers, offset by that half-second gap, as if something was listening to her and then deciding to answer. She stopped again. 2 additional steps, then silence. Mireille Okafor had encountered bears at distance more times than she could count. She had been within 30 feet of a grizzly sow and 2 cubs on the thoroughfare in 2017. She knew the sound profile of large mammals moving through spruce understory. She knew the distinction between a bear's heavy, slightly arrhythmic contact pattern and what she was now hearing. The pattern she was now hearing had a consistent interval between steps. Not the irregular, organic cadence of an animal, a consistent interval. She did not run. She turned slowly, located her position on her GPS unit, and began walking at a steady pace back the way she had come. Behind her, she heard footsteps at the same consistent interval, maintaining what she estimated as a consistent distance. Not approaching, not retreating, maintaining. After approximately half a mile, the footsteps stopped. She did not hear them resume. She continued until she could hear the creek again, and the insects, and a Clark's nutcracker working a pine somewhere to the east. Then she allowed herself to stop. She filed the report that afternoon. Standard language. Possible large mammal following at distance, behavior inconsistent with known profiles. Gareth Polnow reviewed it and scheduled a follow-up sweep for the following week. The sweep found nothing unusual. No footprints consistent with the described event, which Polnow attributed to soil conditions. Mireille did not dispute this. She was not disputing anything. She was accumulating. The third anomaly was Devereaux. She had not expected to see him again. When she spotted him at the Elk Fork kiosk on September 14th, 10 days after his original return, her first response was professional interest. He had filed a new permit on September 11th for a 5-day return trip, same drainage, same route. Everything procedurally in order. She walked over to the kiosk area where he was adjusting his pack straps. She said, "Good morning." He said, "Good morning." She asked if he was back so soon. He said the drainage had gotten under his skin. She asked if he remembered her. He looked at her for what she later described as 1 full second longer than necessary before saying yes, of course, from the first trip. She checked his gear as a matter of routine. Bear canister properly fastened. Garmin on the sternum strap. She noted the brand of the Garmin, a different model than the one he had carried on the first trip. She made a note. It was during this second check-in that she noticed the smell. It was not a bad smell in any conventional sense. Something more chemical and more fundamental. A smell that reminded her of the inside of a tent that had been left sealed in direct sun for several hours. Hot, slightly plasticky, slightly stale. Not the person. The negative space around the person, as if what she was smelling was the record of an enclosed space, rather than a body. The wind shifted before she had more than 3 seconds with it, and then it was gone. She checked him out and watched him head up the trail. He came back 5 days later. September 19th, 3:14 p.m. 3 minutes earlier than his first return. She was not at the kiosk. She saw him emerge from the tree line at the same point as the first return, the bend near the blown-down lodge poles, and cross the meadow at what she estimated as the same pace as before. A seasonal hire named Tomasz Brecht had processed his checkout by the time she arrived at the kiosk. She asked how it had gone. Tomasz said fine, normal, quiet guy. She asked if he had said anything about the hike. Tomasz said he had mentioned the scat at the second crossing. Old scat, probably a week out or more. Mireille went back to her truck and sat with the engine off for a long time. The drainage had been swept clean of bear sign by the field team on September 8th. She had read the sweep report. There was no scat at the second crossing as of September 8th. Devereaux had left for his second trip on September 14th. Even if a bear had deposited fresh scat in the 6 days between the sweep and his departure, 6 days was not a week. And he had used the exact same phrase, a week out or more. The same approximation, the same casual confidence, the same specific location. She requested access to the Garmin data from both trips. While she waited, she returned to the Elk Fork drainage on September 22nd for a fall assessment. At the second crossing, she spent 40 minutes examining every square foot within a 30-foot radius. There was no scat, old, new, or otherwise. The Garmin data arrived on October 3rd. She pulled the files into the district's mapping software and overlaid them on the Elk Fork terrain. The routes were identical. Both trips. Not similar. Identical. The waypoint timestamps differed, as you would expect, but the routing deviated from the permitted trail by no more than 4 meters at any given point across the full extent of both journeys. Mireille had hiked that drainage approximately 60 times. She knew the upper section had several points where route finding was genuinely ambiguous, where the official trail intersected game paths and seasonal use had braided alternatives. No two hikers navigated those sections exactly the same way. The slight biases in routing, the specific line taken through a boulder field, were as distinctive as a fingerprint. The Garmin data showed no such variation between the two trips. None at all. She submitted a formal review request on October 5th. On October 9th, she received a call from a man who identified himself as working with a department she had never heard of, nested within the Forest Service's administrative structure, who asked a series of careful questions about the nature of her request. She answered them. He thanked her. He told her to continue her standard duties. On October 12th, Gareth Polnow called her into his office and told her that her reports had been flagged for administrative review. She was being placed on modified duties pending the review, restricted to front country assignments. He told her this was not disciplinary. He used the phrase, precautionary administrative adjustment. He said it the way someone says a thing they have been advised to say. She cleaned out her locker on October 14th and drove to the Elk Fork trailhead. She sat in the parking area for a long time. The sky was the particular pale blue of high-altitude October, cold and total, with a single contrail dissolving from east to west. The tree line at the far edge of the meadow was still. She watched it for a while. She was not sure what she was watching for. She thought about footsteps that continued 2 beats after she stopped, about a signature that was exactly right, about a smell like the inside of a sealed tent, not the person but the space around the person, about the 1-second pause before he said, "Yes, of course," from the first trip. She had pulled his emergency contact from the permit file, a woman named Cassia Sane, listed as his wife, with a Billings number. She had almost called it 4 times. Each time something stopped her. Not quite fear, not quite recognition, but something that lived in the space where those two things met. She sat until the temperature fell in that sudden, absolute way it fell in that country. And then she started her truck and drove back toward Cody, without looking at the tree line again. She left the Forest Service the following spring, and did not speak about any of this for 2 years. When she finally did, it was only to 2 people. What she told them was this: The thing about the footsteps was not that they mimicked her pace. Plenty of large animals could approximate that by accident. The thing she had spent 2 years trying to file away and could not was the half-second delay. She had considered every available explanation. Echo, proprioceptive confabulation under stress, the strange acoustics of dense spruce in late-season cold. She had been thorough. What she kept returning to was this. A half-second is approximately the processing delay for a human being to hear a sound, interpret it, and generate a physical response. It is not the delay of an animal reacting to stimulus. It is the delay of something that is listening and then deciding to answer. The Frontier Creek drainage is currently listed as open to permitted backcountry travel. The Elk Fork Loop is rated moderate and widely recommended as one of the finest autumn routes in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. The permit kiosks are fully operational. The bridges have been assessed and rated sound. Mireille Okafor now lives in Cody. She does not hike alone. Not in those drainages, and not in any dense Engelmann spruce stand where the understory is open, and the sight lines are long, and the acoustics do strange things with distance. She has explained this preference to people who have asked, and she has always used the same word for the thing she is trying to avoid. Not danger, not wildlife, not even fear. She calls it recognition. She means that she does not want to be somewhere that something might recognize her back. The 2 people she spoke to have each made decisions that significantly altered their professional lives. One no longer works in any capacity involving backcountry public land. The other has not responded to communications in 14 months. The reports are available via public records request to the Shoshone National Forest Office in Cody. Several have been redacted under standard exemptions. 1. A supplemental note filed by Mireille on October 4th is not redacted, but is also not indexed in the public-facing database. It appears only in a physical file. It is 3 sentences. The first documents the Garmin data finding. The second asks a question about the permit records that the note does not itself answer. The third is the sentence that both people she spoke to have separately, without having compared notes, identified as the one they wish they had not read. It is not a frightening sentence. It is the kind of sentence a careful field professional might write after reviewing data that did not cohere, about what it means when 2 separate records are not similar but identical, and what category of explanation remains once you have ruled out the comfortable ones. It is a very short sentence, and it ends with a question mark, and that question mark has no answer. And that, in the end, is the only thing that matters. If this reached something in you that you cannot quite name, leave a like and subscribe. Whatever is out there, it's better to face it together.